Thank you for joining us for the first in this national series on police oversight, legal change, and system transformation. My name is Parveen. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm with the John Humphrey Center for Peace and Human Rights. And it's truly an honor to be here with all of you as we begin this important national conversation. So before we get started, I do want to acknowledge the land that we are on. We are coming from all different parts of Turtle Island. The organization we are from, the John Humphrey Center for Peace and Human Rights, it is located on Treaty 6 territory, Amiskwacy, also known as Beaver Hills House, or by its colonial name, Edmonton. And this is the homeland of the Cree, the Blackfoot, the Métis, and other nations. And we do pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place, and we affirm our relationship with one another. And before we begin any kind of human rights work, we have to go back to the land and recognize and affirm our relationship to the land. It's also about acknowledging that not all voices are heard equally and that we must make a commitment each day to engage and unlearn and to decolonize our learned behaviors, ideas, and practices. Just a little bit of background about JHC. We are a nonprofit, charitable, nonpartisan educational organization working to advance and realize the values and principles of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We focus on engaging children and young people in peace building and human rights education. We foster adult learning and we build community collaborations through education and create dialogue, spaces for dialogue, really, on peace and human rights. We also conduct community-based research to amplify the voices of those who are often excluded in decision-making processes and work with government, businesses, and organizations to strengthen their application of human rights. And over the past 2 decades, we have been committed to advancing these principles of dignity, justice, and human rights through education and community engagement and advocacy. So our mission really is to build more compassionate and informed communities. And this truly guides the series that we are launching with all of you here today. We would like to extend our thanks to the JHC team, partners, and community members who helped make this dialogue possible. And in particular, we would like to thank the City of Edmonton and the Government of Canada for their support in enabling us to offer this and future sessions to you. And of course, we would like to extend our sincerest gratitude to Mr. Ewenson and his team for joining us today and helping to spark this important conversation. Today's discussion, Strengthening Oversight in Alberta, takes a deep dive into a major shift in the province's police accountability landscape. And we're here to explore Alberta's new Police Review Commission, an independent oversight body that represents a significant restructuring of how police complaints will be managed in the province. So this session is intended to help us unpack key questions, such as what gaps the Police Review Commission is designed to address, and how the transition from police-managed processes to an independent agency will unfold. As well, we'll explore what challenges exist in building and maintaining public trust and how systemic learning can emerge from individual complaints. And so to guide this conversation, we are honored to be joined by someone who is at the center of this transformation. I would like to welcome our speaker today, Michael Ewenson, KC, Interim CEO of the Police Review Commission. Mr. Ewenson brings extensive experience in criminal law and oversight, and he has served for 10 years as Deputy Chief Prosecutor in Calgary and from 2022 to 2025 as the Executive Director of the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, known as ASIRT, where Mr. Ewenson led significant progress in reducing a long-standing investigative backlog and strengthening operational capacity. He was appointed interim CEO of the Police Review Commission in July 2025 and is now leading the transition towards a fully independent province-wide oversight system. We are grateful to have him here today to share his insights, the lessons learned, and the path forward for oversight in Alberta. Michael, thank you for joining us. I will be turning it over to you shortly for your remarks. I do want to just clarify for everybody. We will be having Michael's presentation first, and then afterwards, we will have time for questions and discussions after the presentation. So please feel free to add your questions into the chat throughout the session, and we will be monitoring those questions as well. I'll also be sharing, perhaps maybe halfway through, a Google form or really an evaluation where you can provide your feedback for today's session. So now I will pass the floor over to Michael.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Parveen. And thank you all for the interest in the Police Review Commission and for attending this series. It's really important. I'll just start by saying that we want to foster an environment of dialogue and transparency. We aim to get this right, but we know that we're human beings and that with any human built endeavor, there may be mistakes that we make. There may be things that we miss. And so we do not have the sort of ego where we would say, well, we think we have it right. We don't want to hear from people. In fact, it's just the opposite. We want to hear from stakeholders, from what we actually term our partners in the community, to make sure that we get this process right. Of course, we are a live organization, but we have a lot of nimbleness built into the organization where we can change things if we need to. But we need to hear back from the public. And so thank you so much for this organization's interest in the Police Review Commission and for the excellent attendance. Next slide, please, Michelle. So this is just a very high-level agenda of what I'll be going through. I have a PowerPoint with about 20 or so slides, but then I aim to end early enough that I can take all questions. I'm going to leave my email address with you right now. So if everybody has a pen or pencil warmed up, I'll give you my email address. And the point being is that there may be some questions that come in that I either can't answer quickly enough or, quite frankly, need to talk to a colleague to get a true fulsome answer. And you deserve those answers. And so in the interest of transparency, I'll provide my email address. And if there's any questions that come up that I can't answer, or if you're anything like me and you leave a meeting, start walking down the street, or well, hopefully you're not walking in this cold weather, but taking a cab or something along those lines, and you think, oh, I wish I'd asked Mike this. Well, you'll have the email, and so you can do that after the fact. And so my email address is my name, which should be showing up on the screen. It's Michael, Michael .Ewenson at gov.ab.ca. So we'll go through the background of why the Police Review Commission was created in the first place, what its purpose and structure is, really how we want to become a learning organization and evolve, and also some of the challenges and, of course, opportunities that the Police Review Commission has. And then I aim to allow enough time for a robust discussion at the end. Michelle, thank you. So Parveen, I can't say it any better than you. I thought your land acknowledgement was wonderful. I will just note that, of course, I'm on Treaty 7 right now in Calgary, which is, of course, the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina Nation. Just to personalize it a little for me, as a prosecutor, I'm well aware, as a former prosecutor, well aware that Indigenous individuals are overly represented in the criminal justice system. And of course, main factor in that is stems from the historical injustices and injustices that continue to occur to those people. When we embarked upon the building of the Police Review Commission, we had a lot of launch events. We did a lot of outreach. And I felt that it would have been very, very fair and not unexpected if Indigenous individuals said, thank you, Mike, but we're not interested. We don't want to meet with you. This is just another government initiative. And we know how government initiatives historically have inflicted trauma on Indigenous people. And they could have said, look, we don't want any part of this. Just the opposite. They welcomed us, sat down with us, and spoke to us with honesty and with goodwill. And they didn't have to do that. And when we had our launch events, we invited elders to begin each launch event with a prayer. Once again, they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to come and give the organization their prayers and blessings and participate and offer strength to us. But they did so. And to me, that's just reflective of of the wonderful people they are and the role about reconciliation. And so thank you, Parveen. I won't go any further than that because I think you captured it perfectly, but I did want to offer those personal comments on uh, the outreach that they've done with us and how they've, quite frankly, met us in the middle and speak to us and told us how this organization could affect them and the positivity that may come from it. And now it's left with us to deliver on that. Next slide, please. So there's an old historical comment by a former justice minister in Alberta who had indicated that the former Police Act was historically ignored and uh, that it needed comprehensive fixing. And so there was a comprehensive review that was put in place in two phases. You'll see 2018 to 19 and then 2020 to 21. There was an immense amount of feedback that was received. You'll see that notably in terms of the police officer survey, we received 1,500 responses. That was out of about 6,000 officers in Alberta. So it's a fairly high rate of response. What was very lovely to see out of all of this is that no matter who was responding, the general idea was that they were in favor of creating an external oversight agency to deal with all manners of police complaints. Now, I think in my mind, some of that stems from the manner in which the previous oversight existed, which was the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team. ASIRT's history began in 2008 and took its first investigations in 2009. There are some provinces where their oversight mechanisms were created in a time of trauma or controversy in terms of policing and its relationship to either individuals or specific groups. That wasn't the case in Alberta. Uh, the creation of ASIRT actually stemmed from an initiative by the Alberta Associations of Chiefs of Police, and they had raised it in a collaborative fashion and then worked with the government of Alberta to create the agency. And so that collaboration, I think, set us up well in terms of expanding the oversight in Alberta. First responses that came in, and quite frankly, right across the board, there was broad support for establishing an agency that was centralized and also arm's length in terms of dealing with the police and the complaints against them. Now, specifically, we know that in terms of optics, it never looks good for police to be investigating themselves. And from a police standpoint, numerous of the individuals indicated that uh, they had faith in the ASIRT model. And in addition to that, they felt that it was awkward for officers to be investigated by their own, especially in small police services, where if they did something wrong, they're actually being investigated by officers they knew. And then if they went to hearing, their hearing officer, the presiding officer, was actually somebody from their service. And so the optics for themselves as officers weren't great either. And so we use that collaboration that stemmed from the creation of ASIRT, and I think that sort of bled into ultimately the police view that there could be faith in an arm's length organization that existed outside of policing. Michelle, if you can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Police Amendment Act was put in place in 2022, and that established the Police Review Commission. So it was created within the Police Amendment Act, and it formalized 5 categories of complaints that I'll go through later. Notably, ASIRT didn't exist within this framework in terms of the 5 levels of complaint. ASIRT existed and would take complaints under 46.1 of the old Police Act. And so if you look at ASIRT's work, what ASIRT was dealing with was high-level investigations. So we're talking about serious injury or death or serious and sensitive conduct. And I mention that because now when you look at the 5 levels of complaint, what ASIRT really is now going to do is take on level 1 complaints, which are the old workflow of ASIRT, and then level 2. Michelle, please, next slide. Thank you. So when we embarked upon formal engagement, and this is from 2024 to 2025, there's numerous reasons for this, but really the point was The initial engagement told us that the Police Review Commission would be a great idea. That this is something that Albertans wanted, that the police wanted. So we knew that there's buy-in to create this agency as a whole. And then the formal engagement really was done to answer the more detailed questions. What, in fact, would this agency do? What is it really going to look like? How is it going to be staffed? What are the nuts and bolts of this organization? We knew we had an entity, and we knew the levels of complaint, but there was a lot of flexibility being built into how it was going to be built, how it was going to be staffed, what would it really look like when it hits the ground running. And so we reached out to the stakeholders to get this feedback, to find out what was working and wasn't working. Substantial engagement was done with comparable agencies around the province, or pardon me, I should say, around the country, in fact. And so there was a lot of trips to Ontario, for example, to meet with the agencies there, because they have similar agencies, but they're doing them in different silos. So they have LECA, they have the SIU, they have the Inspector General of Policing, and so they have it siloed in terms of different jurisdiction. We're looking to do something all within one umbrella, but nonetheless, there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from different agencies. Travel was done to British Columbia as well, and so there was engagement across the country. Quite frankly, to ask the questions: okay, what really works for you, and also what didn't work? Where did you really stumble when you came out of the gate? Where were the difficulties in launching? What legislation did you pass or have passed that didn't work? What would you do differently? And so we absorbed all those lessons learned and tried to create a made in Alberta solution, but with lessons learned from around the country. Officers, police associations are spoken with, different groups were spoken with in the Indigenous community, police commissions were spoken with. And so there's a lot of travel that was done to say, hey, we know we're launching, we know the Police Review Commission will be a thing, but how is it going to work in its day-to-day practice? Next slide, please, Michelle. So we learned a lot, write volumes on ultimately everything that we heard. This really is condensed the 5 main takeaways. So people said, look, we need better access to the police complaint procedures, and we need to reduce these barriers to participation. As well, continuous engagement is vital to build trust. And so ultimately that was part of the rollout in 2024, 2025, but I want to stress that this continues. So we'll be traveling around, we'll be speaking with people. Like I said, email me if you have issues. We want to explain to people what we're doing, why we're doing it, and we want to find out if we made a mistake. If someone says to us, and this has occurred already, where an individual wrote in and said, look, I'm having a bit of trouble finding the phone number on your website. Maybe that could be better placed. That's very simple, but I need to, and I always remind myself, part of my job is to speak to other lawyers. It's to speak to police associations, chiefs of police, but there's a lot of people in the community who come from disadvantaged backgrounds and who may not have even the technology in terms of hopping on and lodging a complaint via an email address. They may have to use a payphone. They may have to go to their lawyer's place to make a phone call, something along those lines. And so we want to be accessible to everyone because we know the police interact with everyone and a complaint can come from anyone. So accessibility is remarkably important to us. I can tell you that something that I took away from my days at ASIRT was the timeliness of investigations, of the resolutions. ASIRT was historically underfunded and then got a large budget boost in 2022. And now they're operating much more quickly. It's never fast enough for someone, though, quite properly, who may have lost a loved one at the hands of the police, next of kin. It's never fast enough for somebody who's waiting on an answer where they think that they've been victimized by the police, even if it's a non-criminal matter and just a police complaint under the regulations. So we want to be timely. We also want to embark upon frequent communication because if we can't be timely, there may be good reasons for it. It may be a very difficult investigation. It may be that we have not got cooperation from certain parties and we have to wait. It may be that somebody's going through trauma and wants to speak to us, but just isn't able to right away. They deserve that patience. But what we want to be able to do is provide communication to all the parties so that they understand if something's delayed, Why is it delayed? Why is this taking time? Not only do they deserve a final answer on the investigations, but it shouldn't be a situation where they send in a complaint and then it's lost in the ether and they're waiting 6 months, 9 months, and they don't hear from anybody. And so they're going to have that frequent communication. They can understand what's going on. I stress that we cannot always promise that they get the answer that they want. Someone may lodge a complaint, believe that the police have treated them improperly. We may do an investigation and disagree, but they're going to get that communication and they're going to get that final answer and they're going to get an explanation. That also dovetails with transparency and accountability. There will be slides coming up that talks about CEO rules, but we're going to publish not only why we exist, but we're going to publish how we work, how we make these decisions. So the CEO rules will impact people, and it's right in the act and the regulations that any CEO rule must be published. And so that will be transparent in terms of how we operate, how we come to our decisions. And also, of course, we need to be trauma informed and have a culture of continuous learning. And so many of the people that we interact with have suffered trauma, and that may impact the ability for them to cooperate with an investigation. It may impact the type of evidence they can give or the type of statement they can give. We need to have that learning to understand that we're dealing with a wide variety of people, and we want to make sure that we're sensitive to their needs so that we can do a proper investigation and get the proper information from them. Next slide, please, Michelle. So what the Police Review Commission will do, we're responsible for addressing complaints related to the conduct of police officers in Alberta. So we handle criminal allegations as well as violations of professional conduct. As mentioned, we're focused on ensuring fairness in how police officers in Alberta are held accountable for their conduct. And as I mentioned again, and you'll hear this word come up often with me, we believe in transparency, community involvement, and we want the confidence of the public, but we're very mindful that we need to earn the confidence of the public. Next slide, please, Michelle. So the Police Conduct and Oversight Regulation is a new regulation in Alberta. I can tell you that I checked this morning. It is on the King's Printer, and so if you do want to read it, it is available on the government website. Just typing that into Google should get you there. The new act, the last time I checked, wasn't loaded up onto the King's Printer yet, but it will be available very, very shortly. And so the regulation lays out the specific rules ultimately in terms of how the PRC governs itself, what we do, and how we do it. And so, for example, it'll lay out the various categories of police misconduct and what they can be investigated for. It lays out the rules that will follow in terms of, for example, appointing presiding officers to hearings, how we conduct these investigations. It lays out my powers as a CEO in terms of the categorization of offenses and how I can recategorize offenses in terms of taking them from level 1 to a level 2 to a level 3, for example. And so it's quite a voluminous regulation. I can tell you that as we went through this process, there's different options in terms of when you're launching new regulations. One is to not launch a new regulation and simply amend the old one. But in this case, we're allowed to do a repeal and replace, pardon me. And so the entire regulation is brand new in that sense. And so lawyer nerd here, but it is worth a read. I think it reads fairly well, and it will lay out basically how the PRC is going to be run. And if you take the Police Conduct and Oversight Regulation and you were to juxtapose that with the old regulations, you'll see the work that was done. I think it's very streamlined. It makes a lot of sense. It's not perfect. In fact, we knew when it launched that we likely would have to reopen it at some point to make some changes. That's all part of the learning process, is that when you launch, things may look good on paper and you realize that doesn't quite work in the real world. And so we do have that flexibility to reopen it and make some changes to it if and when those changes are noted. And so I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately sometime in the new year, after we're operable for a couple of months, we look and say, okay, this needs to be fixed or that needs to be fixed. And I can tell you in speaking with the higher ups in government that we have that buy-in, that they very much want this to work. And they understand that we need to be nimble. They understand that we need to be flexible after we've launched. And so on that basis, please don't be surprised if you see it reopened. just in terms of cleaning up some things. Michelle, next slide, please. So this is what the PRC can do. So we can investigate level 1 matters involving all police services, including the RCMP, peace officers, and the Legislative Assembly Security Service. So level 1 is, as mentioned earlier, what ASIRT used to do. And so it was always called a 46.1 notification under the old act. And ASIRT would be deployed to investigate police, not peace officers and not the Legislative Assembly Security Service, but just police officers in Alberta for complaints where they've caused a death or serious bodily harm to someone, or if it was serious or sensitive conduct. And I was often asked, well, what is serious or sensitive conduct? That could be allegations of a sexual assault, although to me, those also fall under the harm definition because, the harm that can result from that, psychological harm. It can also be, for example, perjury, passing off particular information to organized crime. Those are examples that would be serious conduct. And so that's what ASIRT used to do and what ASIRT will continue to do. We just don't call it a 46.1 notification anymore. We now call it level 1. That's been expanded, of course, to all peace officers in the province, as well as the Legislative Assembly Security Service. So we changed the name, and also ASIRT now has wider jurisdiction. Now, the level 2 matters didn't exist before. What they are, in principle, are allegations of criminality that wouldn't have reached the level of ASIRT involvement in the past. So to use an example, if it was an officer using force that was allegedly an assault, but didn't cause significant harm or death, that's still a criminal investigation, but it would not have risen to the level that ASIRT would have taken it on because it wouldn't have resulted in death or serious bodily harm. And so that matters would have been left to the individual agency to investigate. So, for example, if there was allegations that a RCMP officer engaged in use of force, a civilian caught it on cell phone and said, look, that looks like an assault. The person was in handcuffs and they shouldn't have been hit. But there was no injuries. ASIRT wouldn't have had jurisdiction. That would have been left to the RCMP to investigate their own. Well, now that becomes a level 2. That comes to the Police Review Commission. So any allegations of criminality against police services, including the RCMP. That doesn't pertain to peace officers, though, notably. Level 3 complaints are ones that deal with police service regulations. And so we can draw sort of a hard and fast line between level 1 and 2, which are criminal code investigations, and then level 3, which are code of conduct investigations. It's important to note that the level 3 complaints involve municipal and First Nation police services. And you'll see a name that isn't there, and that's the RCMP. So the RCMP have not signed on to the Police Review Commission to deal with code of conduct matters. Now, they did sign on, and they didn't have to, but they did sign on for the level 2s. So they've agreed that all criminal matters and allegations facing RCMP members in Alberta will come to the PRC, but their own internal code of conduct matters will remain with the RCMP. I should stress that this wasn't a situation where they said, hey, we're fearful of the PRC or we don't want to play ball. It was more of a legal issue. There's some divided opinions on whether or not they could have done it in the first place, given the RCMP Act and federal legislation. So it didn't come from an adversarial position. And it may be, and I view it as a positive, that at the end of the day, maybe ultimately we prove ourselves to the RCMP and there's the necessary amendments if they're required and they join up in the future. It's not necessarily a bad thing that they haven't joined up yet, because if we look at the amount of officers in the province, this allows us to launch, to get rolling with the municipal services and First Nation police services without that huge volume that would also come from the RCMP. And so it's a bit of an easier launch, if I'm being honest, with everyone, that we don't have them on for level 3s. Perhaps that changes. Level 4 and 5 in the Act do not pertain to the PRC. And there's a further slide where I'll go into that in a bit more and provide a bit of an example of the difference between, say, a level 4 and a level 5. We will monitor transparency and accountability, And if you look at the regulations and ultimately the act when it's posted, alternative dispute resolution and is a very large focus for the Police Review Commission. Now, I want to stress that alternative dispute resolution cannot be forced on an officer and it cannot be forced on a civilian. It is a process by definition where people need to come together and resolve. As the CEO, and of course, these powers will be delegated down to handle the volume of complaints. But I can tell you as CEO, there are certain matters where even if an individual said, hey, I believe in ADR, and the police officer said, yeah, I believe in ADR, the allegations may be too serious to go to alternative dispute resolution. But there's a lot of matters, in my view, that can be solved by bringing people together. But once again, this will never be forced on a civilian. So even if an officer says, I'd love to talk with them, resolve this informally, if a civilian says, I'm not comfortable with this, I've had trauma inflicted upon me, this whole process makes me very uncomfortable, we're never going to force it upon an individual. You can't, right? It cannot work in terms of being forced. So people need to come together on this. But we are staffing up that unit, and I do foresee that we will get uptake in terms of alternative dispute resolution. Michelle, next slide, please. So the flip side of the coin, what can't we do? Okay, we cannot handle complaints about non-Alberta police. Now, ASIRT has an MOU with the Yukon government. So ASIRT does get deployed to the Yukon, but only for level 1 matters. And so they will remain engaged with the Yukon, but only on matters dealing with death and serious bodily harm or serious and sensitive matters. That's the only tentacle of the PRC, if you will, that reaches outside of Alberta, and that's done by agreement with the Yukon government, where they actually provide position to ASIRT in terms of staffing. But other than that, we cannot handle any complaints outside of the province. Now, you will hear about other matters where ASIRT's been deployed, for example, to Nova Scotia on a matter recently, to Manitoba in the past. Those are just simply conflict matters where their own oversight agencies weren't in a position to assist. And so that's just done on a case-by-case basis, but we have no inherent jurisdiction to operate outside of the province. Intake and handle level 3 complaints against RCMP officers. I've already mentioned that if there's any complaint against an RCMP officer that's not criminal in nature and just deals with code of conduct, that remains with the RCMP. We also can't handle employment-related issues. And we cannot handle complaints about peace officers outside of the level 1. And we also very strictly will not provide legal advice to members of the public. Fortunately, and I've got a lot of friends who are defense lawyers, Alberta is staffed with a bunch of wonderful defense lawyers who are really skilled in dealing with police complaints. We've done a lot of outreach with them. I regularly have coffee with them, and we'll be referring those people outside of the PRC to obtain the necessary legal advice. Michelle, please, next slide. So this is a slide that really captures what I've already spoken about, but you'll see that the category 1 deals with the old definition of what we would send to ASIRT. Category 2, of course, is criminal allegations other than statutory offenses that don't meet the criteria for level 1. Pardon me. Criminal allegations and other statutory offenses that don't meet the criteria for level 1. Level 3, code of conduct matters under the police service regulation. We now call that the police complaints and oversight regulation, PCOR. And level 4 and 5 are what the PRC doesn't handle. So I'll draw a bit of an example regarding the 3 and the 4 that may be instructive just in terms of the differences. Say you have a new constable that takes very poor, non-existent notes on an investigation. And ultimately that matter goes to trial, and that constable's called out on the stand, suffers a brutal cross-examination, and a member of the public's thinking, hey, that lack of notes affected that trial. My friend was a victim at that trial. That was really poor conduct on behalf of the officer. If they're a junior officer, that's not a level 3 complaint in my mind. That's job performance. That's further training within the police service. That's supervisors sitting down with them. That's extra courses. That's all the things that can be done within a police service with proper mentorship and training to address this junior officer. Say on the flip side of that, you have a senior officer who has gone through that training and has gone through that training many, many times. and they just won't follow the rules in terms of taking notes. They'll use the lack of a better term, they're just simply lazy regarding their note taking. And there's the point where, quite frankly, it looks like insubordination. They're told they need to take good notes, they never take good notes, and they don't care. That can fall into the level 3, right? Because now we're dealing with insubordination in terms of not following the rules that are put in place by their police service. So that's where the same act, poor notes, can either be a level 4 job performance issue that's best left with the service to train up a well-intentioned officer. But then on the flip side, the level 3, if the officer's been dealt with a lot in the past, that can find its way into an actual code of conduct matter that we would then take on. So it can be very fact specific. And then level 5 is, of course, policies and services of a police service as a whole. And that's not something that the PRC would, of course, be taking on. Next slide, please, Michelle. So when you go through the regulations, sort of pumping the tires of the regulations again, because we spent a lot of time with them or on them, you'll see that there's CEO rulemaking powers. And this gives me some nimbleness in my chair to address issues within the PRC and make it functional in an efficient manner. And so I can create rules governing the processes and procedure with respect to complaints. Of course, there's rules regarding the collection of socio-demographic and race-based data in relation to the submission of complaints. And we're doing this, as it's mentioned, to ensure transparency and accountability and consistency in the oversight. These rules have to be made public. There's 2 of them. Last time I checked up on our website, there will be more. So we have an information sharing rule that governs the exchange of information and evidence between the PRC and the police services. And we have our public reporting rule, which requires myself to report delay reasons when investigations exceed 180 days. And notably, that 180 days applies to ASIRT as well. And so that's our marker that we want to hit in terms of investigations. Now, given that we just launched December 1st, there's no sense publishing any data until we hit 180 days of activity for the Police Review Commission. But what you will see in terms of publishing that data is that we're not just going to give you a number in terms of the investigations that weren't concluded in 180 days. We're going to tell you why in terms of some very specific categories. So, for example, there may be an ASIRT investigation that's highly complex and for a good reason can't be concluded in 180 days. But we'll let you know why, and we'll term that a complex investigation, or it falls in that category. There may be other matters where, for example, we didn't reach a conclusion because of lack of resources. And so we're going to explain that to the public and say, well, this is what's going on internally at the PRC. It was a lack of resource issue. There'll be other situations where, for example, we've sent it for Crown opinions, so our investigation's done, but we're waiting on a CPS, or perhaps we're waiting on the medical examiner for external evidence. And so we can convey that to the public. And that's not to blame either of those entities. There may be very good reasons for those delays, but nonetheless, that's just an issue with transparency where we can explain, okay, this investigation didn't hit that mark. Once again, here's why. There may be situations where, for example, someone's uncooperative, or we have trouble amassing evidence on a specific matter. For example, we need to find a witness, and that witness has sort of disappeared to the forest, if you will. Well, we can explain that as well. And so it's not a blame game situation. It's really just transparency to say, okay, we took on 1,000 investigations this year, or whatever the number is. Here's how many got concluded in 180 days. Here's how many didn't. And here's why those didn't. And ideally, as an organization, every time you check those on, say, a 3 or 4 month basis, you're going to see the numbers of investigations completed in 180 days creep up. Ideally, the public's going to see us getting better and better and better. And if it's an issue with, say, resourcing or whatever it may be, there's a specific category where there's a lot of investigations that aren't completed for a specific reason, we can then say, okay, we've got to address that. And the public knows we need to address that because they see us missing the mark and they know why we're missing the mark. And so that's the reason for that rule. And so you'll see we are held to 180 days within the regulations. It's not a hard and fast rule in the sense that the investigation gets terminated, but we're going to report when we don't hit that marker. Michelle? Thank you. So here's the general structure That's me as interim. Just let you know that I'm interim until December of 2027 in the role. So we have ASIRT that we absorbed. I can tell you that there were discussions with ASIRT, which I used to run prior to the creation of the PRC, as to whether or not we'd change their branding. Because they are part of the PRC, and now the acting executive director of ASIRT reports to me. We felt that since they were around since 2008, taking their first investigations in 2009, and they're a known entity, then it made sense to leave them with their branding. But nonetheless, they do become part of the Police Review Commission. Although I am a lawyer and used to run ASIRT, I will tell you that I'm not going to interfere in the legal decision making in terms of what the executive director of ASIRT is doing. So he is, it's currently a he is clearing officers or sending those files on to the Alberta Crown Prosecution Service for prosecution. It'll only create a bottleneck if every time he made a legal decision, I just said, hang on for a second. Now I want to reinvestigate that legal decision and come to my own conclusion. It would render his decisions meaningless. And so ASIRT's well staffed right now with lawyers. We're going to keep a close eye on its capacity because, of course, it has expanded. I can tell you that we do have positions that we've hired into for level 2 investigators. So ASIRT is getting more bodies. We've largely dealt with the backlog at ASIRT. And the last thing we want to do is expand their mandate, bring them in here, and then recreate a backlog. There's just no point to it. Then we have the case management and resolution unit, and that's where the level 3 matters go to. So once again, ASIRT just deals with criminal matters. Case management and resolution takes on level 3 conduct complaints. They'll manage, as noted, the intake, the assessment, and the categorization of complaints. And they're really the first potential off-ramp to alternative dispute processes that we have built in. Then, of course, as a large agency, we have corporate services, and you can see what they're involved in. And then if you can sort of draw in your head a line between those three and then the secretariat. So we have a registrar, and that's where the hearings occur. And so we'll have a roster of presiding officers. And if a matter is serious enough and it's going to hearing, then ultimately that's headed by the registrar, who will then appoint presiding officers to overhear that process. And that's separate and distinct from my role. So we want to make sure that we just didn't have a CEO calling all the shots within the organization. And so we have the registrar and the hearing office off to the side, where they'll have that neutral roster of presiding officers. It's certainly our intent, and what will happen is that to avoid any sort of bias, we won't have presiding officers from, say, Edmonton Police Service hearing a matter dealing with an Edmonton Police Service member. So we're going to have the non-bias approach to that. And so that will be staffed up in terms of the roster, and the registrar will be responsible for that process, which is outside of what I will be doing. In terms of overall staffing, I think our overall complement is 157 full-time positions. We haven't fully staffed that up. So this wasn't my idea, someone else's, and I say that because I think it was a brilliant idea. That I think initially there can be this desire to say, okay, before we launch, we better have all these positions filled because things are going to get busy. The issue with that is you may not properly understand prior to launching where the busyness in an organization will actually occur. So, for example, it may be that there's a lot of level 2 complaints that come through the door that were unexpected. Or it may be that alternative dispute resolution gets a huge uptake. And we realize, oh, wait a second, that's where the pressure points are. So we want to have that nimbleness. And so we've held back a number of positions that will staff into once we see where the dam's going to burst, so to speak. And maybe it doesn't burst anywhere. And then as a responsible taxpayer organization, we'll have chats with the government about appropriate budget and whether we need all the positions. But, I quite frankly think we will, given the numbers and volume of complaints that come in. But what we'll do is we'll staff up to our various needs after we're live for a particular period of time. Next slide, please, Michelle. So outreach is remarkably important, and something that occurred at ASIRT prior to it being absorbed in the Police Review Commission is that we spent a lot of time traveling to the First Nations, and we realized that we needed to do further and more specific outreach in that area. And so what ASIRT has now is an Indigenous liaison individual, and he's an investigator. He's a former police service member in Calgary, and he's Métis. We leave him trained as an investigator because he needs to have that knowledge, and his knowledge needs to stay current. But really, I'd say 80-90% of his job is Indigenous outreach. And so he travels around to First Nations communities and speaks to individuals, not overly in a proactive fashion. We'd like that to happen. We just don't have the capacity right now. But when an incident does occur in a First Nation, he travels there and he speaks with the chief, with the band counselors, with the family and the elders. And we almost then embark upon a bit of a bespoke process in terms of that specific investigation, asking ourselves, and more importantly, I should stress, asking the community what they need from us in terms of communication, and how do we deal with this situation so they feel that they're being well served. Because, of course, everyone's different in society as a whole and in First Nations, and every community is different. But he does this outreach. We have ASIRT branded tobacco, for example, to provide as a gift to elders. And then we go and we participate with the First Nation and advise them of what's going on with an investigation. Furthermore, we have a Indigenous elder program where on specific investigations, we'll actually pay an honorarium to an elder to ride along with the investigation, if I can use a police term. And so there's certain things we cannot show anyone, no matter if they're an elder or anyone who's not associated with the investigation regarding some of the evidence that we acquire. But what we will do is we'll say to this elder, we're going to advise you of all the steps we're taking in an investigation. We're going to show you what we've done. And you get to ask all the questions. You can ask questions of the ASIRT investigators. For example, why wasn't this person interviewed? Or why does this piece of evidence not attract attention and another one does? And so what happens is we pay this honorarium to an elder. We've also gone through and done sweats with elders, for example, and the Indigenous liaison has done this with elders to sort of cleanse their spirit and mind before they embark upon what can be a very traumatic experience in terms of, for example, watching a video of a death, for example. But the elder will partake in the investigation in terms of viewing everything that ASIRT's done. And it's a way for the elder, who's of course trusted in the community, to go back to the community and say, you know what, ASIRT showed me what they did. They allowed me to ask questions. They were transparent with their investigation. And it doesn't mean that the elder will necessarily agree with the result. The community may not agree with the result, but the investigation didn't occur in secret, if you will. And so that elder can report back to the community. I should note that, of course, in that situation, the outreach first occurs to the next of kin. There are some next of kin who will indicate that they don't want this program to be embarked upon, or they may indicate, look, I don't want the community knowing about my business. I want to keep this private. This is very difficult for us. And so that will govern how we approach it, because the family, the next of kin, will always come first. But of course, this is something that we've embarked upon. And this individual, this Métis individual, has done outreach to other communities, but we're very, very open about dealing with this and creating further affected person support in that manner. Of course, we have an affected person's support individual that's coming on to ASIRT who will reach out to individuals at large. And we have a further Indigenous liaison within the Police Review Commission who's brought on. She's Cree, and she's doing a lot of the outreach to specific to the Police Review Commission. Next slide, please. So this term was fairly new to me, quite frankly. And as I came into the PRC, we realized, okay, we need to be a learning organization because we're an organization that's going to have to evolve. We're not going to get everything right off the basis, or right off the base, I should say. And we need to check the ego at the door and sort of look and say, okay, what's working, what isn't working, what can we do better? And listen to everyone in the community and everyone on the call, for example, to say, okay, you seem well-intentioned. Here's what you're missing. Can you do this? Or if not, why can't you do this? And so when we look at the learning organization, we know we have individuals who are doing brand new jobs, right? This is a brand new organization. They come with experience, but they may not have done any of these specific jobs because they didn't exist in Alberta before. So we have personal mastery that we're going to embark upon. We have the shared vision. One that is really important to me is transparency, is making ethical, professional, principled decisions. And if done so, employees will be supported. It doesn't mean they'll always get it right. We're human beings. We're going to make mistakes. But if your heart's in the right place, that's a great start. And so we have a learning organization model that we're embarking upon, which, of course, in the next slide, Michelle, it gets much more specific. So here is a list of courses that employees will take as part of the Police Review Commission. So I'll give you a moment to go through, but you'll see that these courses were created in an effort to provide learning to the individuals coming into the organization. And so some of them can be fairly straightforward. Disciplinary hearing, basic introduction to how disciplinary hearings occur. Case management, operational. Case management basic. But you have a history of policing in Canada. You have the landscape of police oversight agencies. You have police officer conduct in Alberta. But we also get down to human rights and police oversight, cultural consciousness, using emotional intelligence at the PRC, working with First Nations police services in Alberta. So it's a fairly wide scope of courses that were put together, and really just to stress to employees that we have this for you, we have your support and your back, but you are expected to not just come in and do the job, but to learn and to understand and to have this knowledge, and this knowledge will help you do the best possible job. Thank you, Michelle. So data-informed decision-making, we have a data analysis that's been hired. It's a wonderful individual. And so we are accumulating as much data as possible, because without good data, it's very hard to make good decisions. So we're following trends in terms of, for example, the type of investigations that come in, the type of complaints that come in, and who are making them, right? So we can address these issues. You'll see that I have, under the Act and the regulations, systemic review powers. And so we can launch a systemic review when we notice that there are particular trends that are really troublesome in terms of policing and the relationship of police with civilians in Alberta. And so those decisions will be made. They may be based on a wide scale of data, or it may be more case specific. But that gives us the power to go, me in particular, to go to a police service and say, okay, we're launching a systemic review. You are now obligated under the Act and the regulations to provide me with this information. And I'm going to come publicly and say to the public, I've launched a systemic review into this police service. Here's the reasons why. And then we'll report our findings. And so you're going to know when we're doing it, you're going to know why we're doing it, and you're going to know the result. And I can't give you a specific example because I do not want to prejudge the data that may come in. But there's a wide range of systemic reviews that we can do, and we may look internally. So if there's something that we're not getting right, we can launch review into our own practices in terms of fixing things at the PRC to make sure that the investigations and the resolutions are occurring in a proper manner, in a proper time frame. Michelle? Here we go. So I was ahead one slide in terms of systemic reviews, but this really spells it out in finer detail. So demographic patterns we can look into, complaint characteristics, case pathways as well. So that's the internal view that I was indicating. So disproportionate impacts on specific communities, escalating issues tied to either a specific police service or geographic area. So this all places it really under a one umbrella, which is unique really with the Police Review Commission, because, and if I can use, for example, Ontario as an example, the SIU, which is really Ontario's equivalent of ASIRT, is separate than LECA, which handles their code of conduct complaints, right? Which is separate from the Inspector General for policing. And so they, of course, can talk to one another and review findings in that sense, but we have it all under one roof. So if there's things that I'm seeing that are troublesome regarding information coming in on ASIRT investigations, we can then look, and if that's a reoccurring problem coming in on level 3 investigations, all that information exists under one umbrella. Instead of being shared by distinct organizations, it's all under one umbrella. And so we can then synthesize that and say, okay, this is what we need to do, and this is why. Next slide, please, Michelle. And so this spells it out once again, probably better than I'm articulating it. But we're going to identify reoccurring themes and systemic risks, and we want to improve our own processes. And I can't stress that enough. You can tabletop exercises all you want in terms of how these processes will work. You truly don't know until you're live and you see these things come through the door. And so that gets back to saving some full-time positions that we can staff up to. It gets back to the feedback that we want from the community about what's working and what's not working. And that way we can rejig our processes if we have issues. And it all lends itself ideally to consistency.